So the guy who invented the USB port died. It was tragic. Funeral was wonderful. They have a great eulogy. The pallbearers are getting ready to bury him in the ground and lower the casket in. So they lower the casket into the ground. Whoops, doesn't fit. Pull it back up, turn the whole thing around, try it again. Oh, that's not right either. Pull it up, turn it around, and finally the casket goes in properly. Wait, you guys didn't like that? Tough crowd. Hi, this is Doug from Dynamic Computing, and welcome to episode 63 of 10-Minute Amiga Retrocast. This week, I want to talk about USB on the Amiga. Not so much the USB hardware, although we're going to be touching on that, but what we can do once we get USB on our lovely Amigas. Now, we're all familiar with USB on our PCs, not so much on our Macs because they seem to have taken it out for whatever reason. But we're all familiar with it on our PCs. We've got half a dozen USB ports on there. But the USB technology came out years after Commodore went belly up and the last Amiga rolled off the assembly lines. But did that stop us Amigans from creating USB solutions for our beloved machines? Nay, nay. Now, there have been several different solutions over the years, including the Subway card, which is no longer readily available. There's a Thylacine card, which is kind of a homebrew, do-it-yourself type card that some people do assemble and sell. Then there's the currently available RapidRoad, which is the one that I'm going to be demoing today from individual computers. Some new things that are out now are the new ZZ9000. ZZ9000 card that's available. I'll put a link down here. That has a USB header on it that right now only works with some mass storage devices, but they're working on new drivers for it all the time, and I think before long it'll be a viable USB option for our Zorro slot Amigas. Now, I own one of the Thylacine cards. I bought it back in maybe 2014 or so, 2015, off of eBay. Works absolutely fantastic in my Amiga 4000, my Zorro 3 Amiga 4000, albeit a little slow because it uses the USB 1.1 protocol, which is by itself pretty slow, but it worked flawlessly. You can sort of use them in Zorro 2 machines like the Amiga 2000s, but they're next to useless. They really need the performance of a Zorro 3 slot for some reason. Put in Zorro 2 and it just slows the whole system down to a crawl. Hardly worth it. Now, I do wish somebody would pick up the whole concept of the Thylacine and update it a little bit more modern and make it available again, because it was a pretty decent card. The RapidRoad, here's a picture right here, is a little device that plugs either into the clock port on your A1200, or if you have a clock port add-on like on your AC500 Plus card, it'll slot right onto there, or it piggybacks right on your Xsurf 500 card in your Zorro 3 Amiga, Zorro 2 or Zorro 3 Amiga. That's a great way to do it because then it works at full speed. And I'll tell you what, this thing is fast. When it's working and you're transferring files from USB over to your hard drive or whatever solution you have, it's a zippy little piece of equipment and worth the money. A little bit of advice with the RapidRoad. There's a header on it for like a floppy drive power connector that then gives each USB connector up to 1.5 amps of power. Sounds well and good and great, but there have been a ton of people who have hot swapped their flash drives on their RapidRoad and totally fried it. And I think it has something to do with all the power going through it. So what I recommend when you put it in your machine, don't connect that floppy power connector. It works fine without it. It just doesn't power the slots very much. And then plug in a USB hub that has its own dedicated power. Don't do both. Don't power the RapidRoad internally and then plug in a powered hub because you're just asking for problems. Keep the RapidRoad unpowered, then plug in a powered hub, and you have fewer issues. In my case, what I've got this nice Dell monitor here, and it has a powered hub built in. So it's got 2 USB here on the side, and it's got 2 powered USB on the back. Works fine. Just lets me put my little USB devices right into the side of the monitor. Not too shabby. Now I have a review of the RapidRoad hardware that I did well over a year ago. I'll go ahead and link to that down in the description. It's a 2-part review back when I was actually doing 10-minute Amiga retrocasts. Now, all of these USB adapters that I've talked about so far use the front end called Poseidon. It's called Poseidon, and the software itself is Trident. And it is software. It's basically a USB stack for the Amiga that runs in the background and monitors whatever's plugged into the USB ports, and then tries to assign a class or a device or a driver to that particular device. It works pretty well. I've been pretty content with how it works. It's created by Chris Hodges. Unfortunately, it is no longer under active development by him, and he's stopped as of about version 4.5. Now, there are some competitive stacks out there, a couple of them that are available that have not been updated in years, but they're pretty much limited to just recognizing flash drives and mass storage devices and then keyboards and mice. Anything else, it's not going to see. So Poseidon is the one you want to use if you want to have access to the most devices. Now, Poseidon is a little bit power hungry, so you're going to want probably an 020 machine with a couple of megabytes of RAM to run it. Don't expect to throw one of these cards in a 68,007 megahertz Amiga with 1 meg of RAM and do anything with it, because you're not going to. You need a little bit of power. Let's take a quick look at the interface for the Poseidon software. Now, over here in the Poseidon software, we can set things up. We can tell it what controller it's using. In my case, it's the RapidRoad. If you were using the Thylacine or the ZZ9000, whatever, we'd click on New here, and we would browse to wherever our USB device driver is. Okay, so that's pretty clever. Now, here under Devices, it tells us what's currently installed and what it currently recognizes. So it sees the hub, which is basically the Dell monitor that it sees here. It calls it a hub. It sees a USB flash disk in here, and it's binding it to the mass storage device. And it sees my USB card reader in here, also binding that to the mass storage device. Now, when you plug something new in, it does its best to recognize it. So in this case, I've unplugged my flash drive. And then if I plug it in again, it goes ahead and finds it almost immediately and tries to bind to it. Your mass storage device, your flash drive, or your external hard drive literally just shows up right on the desktop of your Amiga. So here we can see I've got a couple of things on here. Here's a couple of pictures. There, Amiga logo. Let's open that up. Just drag it down to multi-view. And look at that. It brings up a picture I took a couple of months ago. Now, the speed and performance of moving things back and forth on the flash drive is actually pretty good. You're going to get real USB 2.0 speeds, which are, a couple of megs per second of speed, which is really quite good. I run videos off of here. I can play back videos. I can bring pictures over, no problem at all, just by popping a flash drive in. Now, USB hard drives tend to work fine too. Just as a general rule, you probably want to keep it down to just a couple of gigabytes. Don't necessarily throw a terabyte hard drive on here. You'll just confuse the Amiga. But, a couple hundred gigabytes, they work fine. It's a great way to back up your Amiga is to throw on like a 250 gig external hard drive and then just throw your entire Amiga partitions over there to make copies of them. Works wonderfully. Now, another cool option, besides flash drives, is using one of these USB card readers. Now, with our Amiga, we're going to use the CF card because a lot of our devices have the CF card, and we'll be using our SD card. You pick these up, they're a dime a dozen. This happens to be the 16 gigabyte CF card that I use on my Amiga 1000. So when I plug this little beauty in, give it a second to be recognized here. There we go. Look down here. It opens up my Workbench 1000 folder, and I've got a work drive on there too. Now, I name my workbenches this intentionally. Workbench 1000, so I know it goes on my Amiga 1000. Now, the Amiga has no problem at all. If I had just named this workbench, I'd have workbench right here, and I'd have workbench right here, but it gets a little confusing when you try to copy things back and forth, especially from the command line, you know, which one is which. So I usually give them a specific name. And from here, I can just copy over entire folders, entire directories. If I'm working on a project on my Amiga 1000 and I want to do some work on it on my Amiga 4000, I plug in the CF card and drag and drop files back and forth all day long, and it just works wonderfully. Now, another bit of advice. When you are naming your drives, when you first set them up, normally it might default to something like DH0 or SDH0. I always try to set mine up with different names for just this purpose. If I have 3 or 4 Amigas and they're all DH0 and DH1, and I try to use them by plugging the devices into my Amiga 4000, it just gets a little bit confusing with all these DH0s and DH1s. So just give them a unique identifier, GDH0, GDH1, ZDH0, ZDH1, and it'll help keep things organized when you're trying to move them back and forth. It's easier to remember which one is which. Here, we've got another fun option that we can use on our Amigas. This is a standard external DVD drive, which also, of course, reads CDs just fine. You can actually use these right on your Amiga through USB. Let's just unplug the flash drive and we'll plug this little guy in. Now, the way that these work is you have to set these up, okay? So if you've got an operating system like Amiga OS 3.1.4 or 3.9, you're going to find in your Workbench, Storage, DOS drivers directory, you're going to find an icon for CD0. This one I've played with before, so it's called CD0.old. Let's just rename that real quick. All right, this is going to be what you want to take over to devs DOS drivers. You're going to copy it over here, but let's make sure it's set up properly. We're going to look at the one that I have in my devs drawer right now. I have it set up as CD1 just because I also have a SCSI drive on here. If you go into information, you're going to see activate equals 1, a device name, which in general is probably going to be something like this. Warp drive device, SCSI device, whatever your onboard controller is. But what you want is you want to set it up for the name of the USB SCSI controller. In this case, it's called USB SCSI.device. So we would just erase whatever was there before, change it to USB SCSI.device. Now, how do we know what that's called? If we go back into our Trident and we look here, we can see what it's binding to. Then we can look down here in the logs and see that it's calling itself USB SCSI.device. Okay, so that way we know exactly what the device name is that we need. We can always look it up in the information here on Trident, on the Poseidon software. Put the name of the device in here. This time it's calling it Unit 6. And then when you reboot the machine, we should be able to see our CD-ROM. So here you see, after we reboot, we can look at our Amiga format CD that I have in there. Let's clean that up a little bit. Those icons are ugly. Oh, look, Ben speaks. Here's cover disks. and your USB CD should work just fine. Now here's another nice use for USB on the Amiga. You see I've got my Canon DSLR camera here, and it has a USB port on it, so why not give it a try? Let's go ahead and plug in the camera, give it some power, and after a moment we should see an icon show up on the screen representing the camera. Let's take a look in our Trident software. See, now we've got Canon digital camera showing up here. It's showing up as a PTP device, which stands for Photo Transfer Protocol, which is a way for software to communicate directly with digital cameras. Now, we're not necessarily going to be using Photo Transfer Protocol because not much Amiga software really supports it. But you can go in here, Canon EOS Digital Rebel ES, and we're going to show all files. And we should be able to see all the pictures right on the disk, right on the camera. There's this one. Let's find a good one to look at real quick here. $23.99. Let's take a look. And it'll bring the photo right up. I just brought it up in multi-view on the desktop there. But you could take these into any of the programs like image effects, anything like that that we've used before, and it'll read the camera just perfectly. Now, be aware that if your camera is set to go to sleep after like 30 seconds or so, it will probably disconnect the USB when it goes to sleep. It's just not smart enough to keep it awake. So what I did whenever I play with my camera on here, I just turn it and set it to not go off automatically. And then the USB stays running and we're good. Now, why, you may ask? Should we plug the camera directly into here to grab our photos instead of just pulling out the SD card and putting it right into our card reader and doing it? Well, because we can, I guess, you know. There's no particular advantage one way or the other. But it's just another fun thing that our Amigas can do with USB. So everybody wants to surf on their Amiga like it's 1999. And these USB Ethernet cards do tend to work on the Amiga. You can combine them with something like Roadshow, which is the TCP IP stack that I recommend everyone buys. I've showed it in several of my previous reviews and information about getting your Amiga on the internet. But you can take these USB Ethernet devices, plug them right in, and they're generally recognized right away. Let's take a look in Trident again, and we're going to see that it's recognized as the DSB650TX USB Ethernet, and it binds itself to the Pegasus class controller. Now we can also go down here and take a look. It's calling it USB Pegasus.device. Now, these kinds of things like the USB SCSI we looked at before, USB Pegasus.device, don't ever look for these on your hard drive because you will never find them. I made that mistake a couple of years ago when I first got my Thylacine USB device. I saw it was binding it here, so I thought, oh, I gotta have that device. Nope, this is all virtual, these all exist in memory, and they're created as you go on. But we're gonna need this name in a second. Now, this particular controller I've had really good luck with. I've also tried a couple of other ones. I've got a TrendNet here that in theory is supposed to work, and it binds just fine, but I can never get it online. So your mileage may vary, but I have had good luck with this one. Now, what we're going to do, assuming you're using Roadshow, which I strongly recommend, we're going to go into storage. This time we're going to go into net interfaces, and we're going to find one called ASICs. Okay, this is just a generic one. First thing we're going to do is rename it. We're going to call it D-Link. And then we're going to open it up. Now I'm using this in the edit pad here, but you can open it up in Ed if you want it to, or Reddit. Whichever one you want to open it up with works fine. Okay, this is configuration for the Poseidon USB stack Ethernet. The device name is, in this case, it was USB ASICs, but we know it's USB Pegasus. How do we know that? Because we just looked it up in the Trident software. Okay, now if you have to, you can set your IP addresses and everything right down here. No problem at all. In this case, I've already created it, so you'll see I've already got mine over here. D-Link USB Pegasus .device right there. Now in theory, we should be on the internet on here because I've already rebooted with my D-Link device here. Once you create that new file, you rename it D-Link, you put the USB Pegasus.device in there, you just drag that over to Dev's Net Interfaces and reboot as long as you have Roadshow installed, and it should automatically bind with it. So let's see here. Show net status, I think is the name of it. Let's see. Add net interface, D-Link. Now I do not have mine set to automatically launch the TCP IP stack, and I do that because I may or may not have my network cable installed. So I launch it manually here. See, I'm getting my IP address. Now let's ping www.google.com. We get our response, our ping response. So we're online already with our USB Ethernet right here. So we can get online with our USB Ethernet fine. What happens if we want to use a USB modem like this little guy right here? Standard telephone connection. Well, these work too, and they'll bind with something called USB serial.device. And then in your terminal program, you're going to want to change it from connecting to serial device to USB serial.device. But I have not had a phone line in 6 years, so I honestly can't test it out and make sure it works. But it binds correctly with one of these little devices. You should be okay. Now, where would we be without a nice USB keyboard or USB mouse? Now, in this case, I'm using a little trackball because I had it handy, and we're going to plug it in. So as soon as I plug it in, you'll see already I can move things around here just fine. My trackball is working just beautifully. It's recognized in just a few seconds. And look at this. The scroll bar works perfectly too. Let's do a better example of that. Go up here. My scroll wheel works absolutely perfectly. So right click also works just fine. So you can get up here, no problem at all. Now, the one and only thing that I've discovered about using a USB mouse on an Amiga is in a program, most notably iBrowse. When I launch iBrowse, scrolling works just great, no problem at all. But you go to click a link with the left mouse button, absolutely nothing happens unless you double click the link. So single clicking the link does not do it like it does with an Amiga mouse. You actually have to double click the link, or you have to right click and view link. That works too. It's just an odd little thing. I don't know if it's something with MUI or something with iBrowse, but I can never get just single clicking a link to work. Where with the regular Amiga mouse, single clicking a link works absolutely perfectly. Just an odd little thing, but easy to work around. Now when you plug in a USB keyboard, like this little guy right here, everything works absolutely perfectly. Every key is recognized. And your Amiga keys are usually replaced with the Windows key. Usually there's a Windows key over in the right-hand corner. So if we wanted to reboot, it'd be Windows Control. That would reboot the Amiga. And wired keyboards work absolutely perfectly. Wireless ones with a little dongles generally work okay too. One caveat is if you boot to a floppy disk, of course it's not going to bind the USB drivers, so your USB keyboard and USB mouse will be completely useless if you either boot to floppy or if you boot to, say, the no startup sequence mode. It's just not going to function. So have a real Amiga mouse and keyboard on standby just in case you need to use it. Now here's a fun little one here. I'm sure everyone still uses their old Palm Pilots like we used to do back in the 2000s before you all had your Android phones and that other company that makes phones, iFlorx, what are they called? iPhones. A lot of us had Palm devices. This one happens to be a handspring visor, and it has the Wi-Fi module on it plugged right in the back. So in theory, if I had a WEP enabled Wi-Fi network here, I'd be able to get on Wi-Fi in this. But did you know you can sync your Palm handheld right with your Amiga? There's a program called Palm GUI 3. We'll just give that a little launch here, that actually allows you to synchronize your Palm Pilot with your Amiga. We'll plug this little guy in, tell it to start the hot sync, and okay, we're going to start the hot sync. And press the little button. It can get a little finicky at times. Let's try that again. There we go. Make our little hot sync sounds, and it automatically copies over and backs up your entire Palm Pilot right onto your Amiga. You can also use this to install Palm Pilot software. You download it to your Amiga, and you can install new Palm Pilot programs right onto it, right from here. Now, unfortunately, it does not sync the address book or the calendar with any address book or calendar on the Amiga, but it's great for doing backups and it's great for installing new apps. Completely useless, but fun. So there's a couple other really cool things that you can do with USB on the Amiga. One of them is an audio device. I'll put a little picture of one up here. They're little USB keys that give your Amiga the ability to record and play back 16-bit audio right through the audio device. Now, I own one, and I've used it, and I've run some tests recording in 16-bit audio, and it's fine. It's okay. I've played back some stuff in 16-bit audio. It's a little bit processor intensive, but it works okay. But I can't find it. I cleaned my office a couple of weeks ago, and I found my little audio device, and I said, let's put this someplace safe so I know exactly where it is. And now I can't find it to save my soul. It's around here someplace. They're like $15 on Amazon. If you have USB, it's worth trying one out just to experiment with it and see what you can do with it. They work through the AHI or the ACHI audio interface, and they work okay. Now, webcams like this little beauty up here, that's a little Logitech STX webcam. Recognized perfectly fine by Trident. The video is recognized properly with one of my webcams. The audio is recognized with both of them. And there's some software out there that's supposed to allow you to capture images from a webcam and save them as JPEG files or PNG files. It's called cAMIra. Let's see, I think I've got it right here. And this is supposed to bring up the picture from your webcam and allow you to take snapshots of it or refresh it every second or so. but it doesn't work with my two cameras. I've tried both of them, I've tried different drivers, and it just doesn't work with my two cameras. But your results may vary, and you could have fun at least doing a little bit of picture capture with a device like that. Now here's something that's absolutely cool and absolutely infuriating at the same time. This is a standard Bluetooth USB dongle. This is the same USB dongle after I dropped it on the floor and its little case popped off. Good job, Douglas. But this little guy, you just plug her right in. It recognizes immediately Bluetooth 2.0, and it even has a cool little Bluetooth class, cool little Bluetooth symbol there. Does absolutely nothing. The driver exists in Poseidon for Bluetooth, but no USB stack exists for the Amiga that I've been able to find, which means it's ready to go. It's just waiting for somebody to set up a USB stack for Bluetooth USB devices to recognize things like audio or keyboards or mice or anything like that. So yeah, it works, it's recognized, but you can't do anything with it. Bummer. Now a couple of other things that work that I'm not going to show here are USB serial and some USB parallel devices. You've seen them. They've got USB on one end and like a 25-pin serial port on the other. Plug them in, they work fine. It's just with your serial software on the Amiga, just change the device name to USB serial.device, and they work just fine with most software that is fairly Amiga compatible. There's some USB MIDI devices out there that work fine on the Amiga. Again, change the device name in your software and it'll recognize a USB MIDI device. We've got USB printers. Many of those will work, mostly the older ones. Don't expect these $49 HP USB printers to work because they're just hot garbage. But say a USB laser printer from a couple years back, a USB inkjet printer, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 years old, probably going to work okay. Now, two things that I'd like. One of them is USB scanners. That would be nice to have a default scanner driver so we could scan images into something like Image Effects or AdPro or a custom program, and I haven't been able to find anything on that. Another thing that'd be clever but not as useful as you might think would be USB joystick support. Because of how USB works on the Amiga, in that you have to have this software running, it's only going to work with games that actually run from Workbench. Then they could maybe use the joystick driver for it. But as far as booting to floppy or GoTech drives or anything like that, none of that old software could even theoretically recognize a USB joystick. It just can't. So clever idea, but it wouldn't really work. So what's my overall opinion of USB on the Amiga? Well, I would like to have it on all of mine, just for the convenience of being able to take a flash drive or take a CF card and move it anywhere I want to and transfer data anywhere I want to. It's kind of nice. More useful in some ways than having them networked, because then you can copy over big files and actually run them right on the flash drive. Copy over big pictures, movies, things like that. It makes it nice for something like that. It's also nice for keyboard or mouse use if you do a lot of stuff in Workbench. Less useful if you do a lot of gaming. It just wouldn't be quite as practical. Some of the things like the palm syncing, fun, completely useless, but fun. The audio, if it were a better quality audio, that would be a great solution, but it's just okay quality audio that you get out of the little audio dongles. So not really practical. Now, what would be awesome if somebody came up with a USB PCMCIA interface. Slot that into our Amiga 600s or Amiga 1200s, have 2 USB ports on it that work with Poseidon. That would actually be really cool, because then we could throw on CD-ROM drives and everything like that. I think that there are some stumbling blocks with the way PCMCIA works, where it's just not practical to create a driver for that, but I don't know enough about it, but it would be cool. I also would like USB to be more stable. I've had good luck with the Thylacine card, very few lockups with that, but still occasional lockups. I'll tell you what, with the RapidRoad, it does lock up. You put a device in there, and it just locks up the whole Amiga with the USB trying to recognize it on occasion. Or you try and boot with a device already plugged in, it's not recognized. It's not perfect. It's pretty good, but it's not perfect. Huge thank you to my patrons. I really appreciate everything you guys do for me. If you want to join in and help me grow the channel, make it even better, make the video even better, you can check me out at patreon.com/10mark. You'll find me right there. And huge thanks to my new patrons this month, Dan James, Henry Yelinin, and Gregory Hayes. Thanks, guys. And here's a nice list of all of my fantastic patrons. Thanks, each and every one of you. I would love to hear your USB stories. Tell me about how much better the Subway card is than the RapidRoad card. Tell me your nightmares. Tell me your success stories. What other devices are you using that I didn't cover in this episode? Leave a comment down below, please. Also, please like and subscribe. It really helps the channel. Follow me on Twitter at 10mark1. But until next time, this is USB driver Douglas.device signing out.